In the year 6420, after the closed centuries ended, humanity returned to its ancestral Earth and began excavating the thin band they called the human layer. One return survey team opened a sealed building and found a city inside it. Streets with no weather, fountains with no water, trees with no soil, and human-shaped bodies made of plastic waiting behind glass. The Human Layer project began with a simple problem. The descendants who returned to Earth knew the broad history of their ancestors, the acceleration, the screen age, the fragmentation, the departure, and the long period when Earth became too unstable for ordinary access. What they did not understand was daily life. That is why the return surveys were created. They were not treasure hunts. They were attempts to read us from the objects and places we left behind. The mall structure was discovered beneath a restored forest outside the old coastal expansion belt. From the surface, it looked like a low concrete ridge. Ground radar showed corridors, vertical shafts, service tunnels, and a wide central hollow capped by collapsed glass. When the survey team cut through the roof, they found an indoor city. The air was sealed and mineral dry. The floor was tiled in repeating paths. Dead escalators rose like ceremonial ramps. A fountain sat at the center, empty except for sediment, coins, and the roots of plants that had entered through cracks in the skylight. Early field notes called it a civic temple. The classification made sense. The building had processional corridors, symbolic display chambers, repeated icons, food areas, water features, and human-shaped figures arranged behind transparent barriers. But nothing in the building pointed toward a god. The evidence pointed toward desire. This was not a temple in the old sense. It was a shopping mall, one of the enclosed consumption environments built by the screen-age civilization before the last retail contraction. The mall's first readable pattern was motion. This is often how human layer studies works. Future archaeologists begin with materials, then discover behavior hiding inside the materials. Corridors did not simply connect rooms. They bent, widened, narrowed, opened into atriums, and returned people past displays from slightly different angles. The Institute reconstructed walking paths from floorware, camera mounts, directory fragments, and the positions of benches, kiosks, escalators, and storefront thresholds. Layer humans had entered the building, walked without a practical destination, looked into glass chambers, paused, compared, ate, carried bags, and walked again. This confused the first interpreters. In recovery-age cities, walking is usually transit, exercise, or ceremony. In the mall, it was all three and something else. The path created exposure. Exposure created wanting. Wanting created movement toward purchase. The ritual was not buying alone. It was browsing, a state between need and decision. The mall turned uncertainty into architecture. The side chambers were not private rooms. They were stages. Behind glass, the team found display stands, hangers, shelves, mirrors, lighting tracks, and plastic forms shaped like human bodies. Some chambers held clothing. Others held shoes, perfumes, small machines, toys, jewelry, books, and decorative objects that had no survival function. At first, researchers treated the chambers as storage. Later, they understood the arrangement was persuasive. Objects were not merely kept there. They were composed. Light, height, color, and spacing made ordinary goods feel like possible lives. The glass mattered. It separated the walker from the object, while making possession imaginable. The shopper saw a body dressed differently, a home arranged differently, a face made more desirable, a future self waiting behind a barrier that could be crossed with payment. The mall did not only sell things, it displayed alternate selves at human scale. The most contested room was the food court. It resembled a communal dining hall. Many counters surrounded a shared seating area. Trays, chairs, disposable containers, branded fragments, and grease residues showed that large numbers of people ate there. But the cooking zones were separated into competing units, each with its own visual language. The first hypothesis called it an altar complex. The evidence was not absurd. People approached counters, made selections, exchanged tokens, received prepared offerings, sat beneath bright signs, and consumed the food in public view. The later interpretation was more precise. The food court solved a mall problem. People could not be kept walking forever. They needed rest, sugar, salt, heat, caffeine, and a place to watch other people. The eating hall reset the body so the commercial walk could continue. The mall fed people, but not as hospitality. It fed them as circulation management. No artifact disturbed the return team more than the mannequins. They were human in outline and empty in every other way. Some had faces without eyes, some had hands without fingerprints, some had heads removed entirely. They stood in family groups, athletic poses, formal postures, and frozen gestures of leisure. The Institute first cataloged them as votive bodies. Later, material analysis showed they were commercial display tools. They existed to let shoppers imagine clothing on a body without confronting a real person inside it. That made the mannequin more important, not less. The mall needed bodies that could not refuse the role assigned to them. Young, clean, still available, endlessly replaceable bodies. They showed not what people were, but what the commercial environment wanted people to want. In the human layer, mannequins are often described as empty ancestors, not because they were alive, but because they preserve the shape of the desires sold to living people. Outside the mall, weather existed. Heat, rain, wind, darkness, insects, traffic, and noise shaped the city. Inside, the environment was edited. Temperature was stabilized. Light was extended. Music controlled the emotional floor. Fragrance, polish, air movement, and reflective surfaces worked together to make the building feel detached from ordinary time. This is why the Institute eventually stopped calling malls simple marketplaces. A market is a place where exchange happens. A mall was an atmosphere where exchange became easier to imagine. The climate control systems were not background infrastructure. They were part of the persuasion. The building offered a world where nothing aged quickly, nothing smelled like labor for long, and every surface implied that comfort could be maintained if desire kept moving. Layer humans did not merely shop in malls, they entered a managed weather system for wanting. A purely commercial reading misses why the mall endured in memory after its economic peak. Recovered photographs, personal messages, police logs, transit records, and cultural fragments show that malls were social interiors. Young people waited there. Families cooled themselves there. Workers spent long shifts there. Elderly walkers used the corridors before stores opened. Teenagers learned visibility, style, flirting, boredom, and small rebellion beneath artificial light. The mall sold goods, but it also provided a semi-public room in societies where many other rooms required ownership, permission, or money. Its openness was conditional, watched, and commercial. But it was still a place to be when there was nowhere else to go. That is why the future archive treats malls with more tenderness than early reports did. The mall was a behavior machine. It was also a shelter. This is the channel's larger subject. Not malls, not phones, not server farms by themselves. The human layer studies the places where ordinary people tried to belong inside systems that were larger than they were. The same corridor could be a sales funnel, a winter refuge, a teenage territory, and a memory of freedom before a person could drive away. By the late screen age, many malls had begun to fail. Some were converted. Some were abandoned. Some became medical offices, warehouses, churches, schools, housing experiments, or ruins photographed by people nostalgic for a future that had already ended. The human layer preserves this transition unevenly. In some sites, storefronts remained full. In others, the signs had been removed, the fountains drained, the plants replaced with dust, and the corridors stripped for copper and equipment. The dead mall became an artifact before it was buried. Layer humans returned to photograph empty atriums because they sensed that something larger than retail was ending. A form of public interior life was disappearing, and no one agreed on what should replace it. Future archaeologists therefore read the mall as a layered object. First a marketplace, then a climate-controlled town square, then a memory chamber, then a ruin, then a fossil. The mall was not a temple, but it had performed a temple's older function. It gathered people around a shared idea of what life was supposed to become. The final archive display contains no grand monument. It shows a directory map, a mannequin hand, a cracked food tray, a loyalty card with its markings erased, a coin from the fountain, and a small plastic shopping bag fused into sediment. The label reads, "Enclosed retail environment, screen age, probable leisure commerce complex." It is accurate. It is inadequate. The mall reveals a civilization that learned to build interiors for desire. It shows how layer humans moved through abundance, how they rehearsed identity, how they rested between purchases, how young people searched for each other, how comfort was engineered, and how public life could be offered through private ownership. Future scholars sometimes ask whether malls made people shallow. The better question is why so many deep human needs were routed through such shallow surfaces: belonging, beauty, status, shelter, appetite, boredom, and the wish to become slightly different by carrying something new out of a glass chamber. The mall was not the strangest structure in the human layer because it sold things. It was strange because it made wanting feel like a place, and this is why the return surveys continued. Every ordinary object and every ordinary room kept asking the same question. If our descendants found only the remains, would they understand what kind of ancestors we were?